Hi, I'm Ashish, and I love watching house cleaning videos.
Awesome. And apparently, watching deep cleaning videos is relaxing for you. But I'm curious, in what way? Like, what do you enjoy so much about this?
I don't know. I think it's just a thought. It's just watching somebody work when you are procrastinating. I think there's certain thrill to it, but I'm also someone who likes cleaning my stuff for, as a part of my own relaxation. So sometimes I just get tips from people like the way they are cleaning the domes or the living room. But in general, I just find it very peaceful. I think it's just like you are looking at something, but you are not really processing information compared to other reels or other sort of information. So I think it's a great way for me to relax.
I'm sure your roommate is a lucky person, because I'm sure it's true. But
Well, fun fact, I've never had a roommate in college. So and it was quite surprising in my first year because usually at Swarthmore we get a lot of like everybody gets a roommate in their first years. I can talk about it later on. I had a trick to not get a roommate, but yeah.
I will, if I remember or if I don't remember, please do like remind me. We'll touch upon the conversation. I'm excited to hear about this trick. Um, so yeah, for listeners, this is Aashish Panta. He's a rising junior at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, pursuing economics and mathematics. Today, we'll just be hearing more from Ashish about the choices he's made, the lessons he's learned along the way, as well as insight and wisdom, which I'm sure this episode will hold for all you listeners as you embark on this new and exciting journey of your life, which we call as university, which is this big word which I'm aiming to sort of deconstruct and break down on this podcast through so many episodes. So, welcome to Uni Unveiled. I'm your host, Arya Darod. I'm currently a sophomore at Minerva University. Welcome, Ashish, and thank you for joining me today. I'm excited for the conversation we're about to have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arya, for having me in this podcast or this show. I think I really like, as somebody who was applying to colleges from Nepal, I think it was a big struggle for me to just get my head around what is this process like? Like, how do I even start it? Or what are the steps I need to take throughout this journey? I am really grateful to you for creating this content for international students, and I've seen the previous speakers that you have brought, just creating this array of information for students to access and have it all in one place.
Mm.
People from China, Nepal, India, and all over the world, honestly, and just bringing all this perspective together. Really happy to be part of this.
Awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And that's totally the aim of the podcast is um, a resource which we didn't have, but hopefully our
Mhm.
juniors are much better guided and supported through this sort of database of information. So I'm glad that you're very well aligned on the purpose here. And I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation. So I'll just jump right into it. Would love to start with, I'm sure this will be super fascinating for most listeners. You've been working on a very interesting research project this summer. So I don't really want to give any hints or giveaways, but what has been the focus of the research?
Yeah, I am working on an independent project right now. So I'm a rising junior. So I've just finished my first 2 years in college. So I don't really have a lot of hard skills that is really required to launch big research projects. But I just wanted to work with what I've learned so far and employ my knowledge in context that I was brought up in. So I was raised in Kathmandu in Nepal, and I saw this rapid transition of federalism in Nepal. I'm sure like India was a federal republic since a very long time, but Nepal just became a federal republic in 2015 through a new constitution. And our first tenure of the local elected officials in province and local governments was 2017 to 2021. So I wanted to see like what did this system change bring upon people in terms of economic growth? Which were the municipalities that experienced a huge economic growth versus the others which did not, and what are the factors contributing to it? So I was first curious about the political leadership that's in every municipality. So I worked with that data. I compiled a data set on, who's the mayor leading the municipality, which party they represent, what is their gender, what is their age. So I started compiling it and looking at associations on whether, like a younger mayor is creating more economic growth or not. Later on, I've expanded this research to think about how institutional growth of each municipality impacts economic growth and bringing in metrics of ethnicities as well. So it was a small idea in the beginning and it has evolved throughout some. Right now, I think I was just having my concluding calls with one of my research mentors yesterday, and I think she was asking me, okay, we have done so much work. Where is this going now? And my answer is, I probably want to write a paper about the results that I've seen. I've seen, local significant growth in municipalities. So that's something I'm hoping to write upon. But I'm also, this also led me to explore these gaps in literature of Nepal, as in we don't have a way to compare similarity between municipalities in terms of ethnicity in a country where there are like 140 castes. How do you compare if one municipality is similar to another municipality? So that's also a methodological paper that I'm hoping to use the way US politics decides electoral borders. It's called gerrymandering. So I'm hoping to use that technique to develop a metric for measuring ethnic similarities in municipalities of Nepal. So these are big ideas. So it's just I would just consider this summer as a way for me to begin embark on these big research projects that I hope to carry on in during my time at Swarthmore and even beyond.
Yeah, I mean, even when you first described it to me, it sounded, I was in a positive sense, it sounded like a very big and bold idea. And the first thing I thought was like, this is long term. Like one summer isn't going to be enough for Ashish.
Yeah.
Going to take a while, but sounds like a very meaningful project. I honestly could probably pick your brain about this for the rest of the podcast if I had to. But I want to sort of take us to, you talked about the specifics of your research. I want to sort of take a step back and look at just the process of conducting that research from a higher level over the last few months. Any higher level reflections or takeaways about something you've learned about the general process of sort of conducting research? And you also mentioned hard skills. So if you'd like to touch upon the hard skills aspect as well.
Yeah, I think it's been a very reflective summer because interesting thing about my summer is I'm in Chicago living with my friends. So I work from my home, right? I work from my bedroom, and I just this setup, this monitor, this table, this chair. That's the company I have throughout my day when I'm working alone in this room. So it has really made me reflect upon why am I pursuing this and where I want to be in my next 5 years or 10 years, or just ask myself, can I keep doing this for the rest of my life? So it has really helped me shape my understanding of what are my strengths and what are my passion. I think I'm really grateful that I have learned that I really enjoy this process of thinking about problems of our society in a different way and trying to kind of like make contribution to it, trying to enable other people to understand it, trying to maybe like have policy recommendations to improve upon things that I think are important. So that has been a big reflection on just realizing that I enjoy this process. But beyond that, I think this has also like given me a lot of confidence about I can be somebody who can I can be a self-starter. I can be someone who can launch things on my own, even when I do not have a support system, or I can be someone who can create that support system. So I think that has been my big takeaways from this summer, and I've really enjoyed this process, honestly. Because one big thing I think you might have also experienced it as our friends were studying back home, they get to learn about our context, right? When I take a health economics at Swarthmore, nobody is teaching me about healthcare system of Nepal or South Asia. They're teaching me about a healthcare system of US. So just being able to take the hard skills that I've learned in my classroom and put it in the context of Nepal and ask questions about why is this municipality experiencing this rapid economic growth. I think that has been quite meaningful to me. But beyond that, in terms of hard skill, I've really worked with like statistical softwares like Stata and R, and I've worked with data visualization tools like Tableau. So these are things that I'm constantly learning to employ these in my projects, because I come across these new data sets, then I want to visualize them. I want to tell a story, right? So I end up looking up YouTube videos or taking online courses so that I can tell the stories. Besides that, I've worked a lot. My life almost feels like trapped in Excel. Sometimes I dream about Excel because I'm in Excel all the time. So I've just learned all these fancy tools and techniques of working with data sets in Excel, and especially in context of Nepal or like global South, these data sets are not arranged in a way for easy access. Like in US, you just need to find the data. You don't need to arrange the data. You don't have to engineer the data to a certain format. But in case of Nepal, like I was extracting data from PDFs, I was extracting data from messed up Excels, right? So I think ways to work with this data, engineer them in a way that's convenient for me to work on. So I think that's the biggest hard skill. Uh, Beyond that, I think the big thing I've learned this summer is being able to tell about my work. Because since I'm working alone, I just reach out to my professors or mentors or some random people I saw on LinkedIn. I just reach out to them and say, hi, hey, can I hop on a call with you and explain you my research and get feedback on it? So I've really learned this skill of how do you compress the same thing for a 5 minute call versus a 15-minute call or an hour long call, and how do you ask the right question with the right person? So I think that's also kind of like a mix of hard skill versus mix of hard skill and soft skill that I've learned during this research process.
Mm. So you touched upon both a few hard skills as well as a beautiful soft skill as well, which I two soft skills in fact, which I think one is being self-directed, because from the sense I'm getting, this was a project you sort of conceptualized, you gave a structure to, you set deadlines to, so you're sort of building it as you go. And in that sense, my project and your project on a very high level, that's a big similarity I found. Uh,
Yeah.
as well as number two, the ability to get on calls and communicate that project to these various people. I really love this idea of like the same research, having a 5 minute pitch, having a 30-minute pitch, having an hour long pitch. That's valuable because some people have only got 5 minutes and some people want to know like
Yeah.
about that research. Um, so lovely. Just for someone who is interested in getting into this research path, like even before they start their undergrad journey, they know that they want research to be a big part. Maybe this is what they're looking at for a career as well. Any way to best prepare for that even prior to college in terms of hard and soft skill building?
I think it really depends upon the field as well, because I know like my background while applying to colleges was not very academic. It was more like community leadership and community impact. But I had friends who were from a very solid academic background. They were reaching out to professors abroad and working on projects with them. They were working with like university students. And those were the students, especially in STEM. I think, especially in computer science or even in physics, it's easier to get hands on these research opportunities, even as an undergrad. And somehow I find these people incredibly smart. People who are working on CS projects or physics projects, like they are able to make contributions to big research. I think it might not be that easy or feasible in terms of econ, because econ is much simpler in even in undergrad level, but it turns into a very complicated, almost a STEM like field in graduate level. So even I, as somebody who has already taken maybe like around 6 econ courses, I don't have the competence to fully understand research papers in economics, right? I'm leaning on help from my mentors to help me break down these big concepts of econ. So that could be a particular challenge. But if you're somebody who's really interested in research, I think the first way is to learn about it. Like read Economic Times or other newspapers which covers the groundbreaking researches in a layman term, like for general people. And I'm not sure if high school students would have access to it, but if you can find, like, look into econ papers that are published and that are accessible through your institution or for general public. So I think that could be two ways, like just get hang of what you are going into, get hang of what your professors are working on when you are applying to colleges. And it necessarily doesn't have to translate into a research project for yourself. It could also translate into things that you can talk about in your essays when you are saying, I want to attend Swarthmore College and do economics major because of what XYZ reason, because you read these newspapers, you read these articles, you went through the CVs of professors and saw what they are working on. You have an idea of what is it like to be a student of economics, or what it is like to know these groundbreaking researchers. So I think that would be the general advice I would have. Somebody is really interested in research and wants to pursue a grad school after undergrad.
Mm. And just to follow up on this, if I'm sure during your first year at Swarthmore, as well as for this project especially, I'm sure you've had to dive into some research papers, some jargon in the econ and math field. Personally, I've always struggled with any field just reading through a research paper because I personally find them like super dry, super long. I tend to sort of drift away. Would love to hear from you if there's any best practices or strategies for going through a research paper and like really understanding the material versus just like reading the lines?
Yeah, I think that's really difficult, and I really resonate with you in terms of getting lost in these papers. Like even for my research, I'm trying to use some techniques, and I was looking up those techniques, like how they have been previously employed, and like I keep on reading the abstract and introduction, and it totally makes sense, right? Because they don't bring any math there. And as soon as I go to the model formula or the techniques that they are using, I just get lost because like nobody has ever taught me the technique. How on earth am I supposed to understand it? So it's a difficult thing. I think one way, like if you when you are in college, one way to overcome that is to talk with your professors in office hours. And in my experience, professors really get excited when you bring something from like outside of class or something, which was a side topic in the class to office hours and ask them about it. Because especially in liberal arts school or small schools, like professors are there to help you, right? Like their passion is helping students understand. So when you bring these things up with professors, like they are very eager to help you out. So I think that could be a way for students, especially who are in college, to understand these materials. For high schoolers or people who are in gap year and trying to apply, I don't like maybe I think the simple answer would be Google it up or ask in Reddit or look previous threads in Reddit. But I don't know how useful that is. But yeah, I think it's a complicated question. Uh, Another way would be just to reach out to people who are not you don't have access to professors right away as a high school graduate, but maybe reach out to people who are in college or like people from your high school who have been in that field. So I think reaching out and talking with people about it is the best way, I think, to understand it. I think that's the only tip I have. As of now, one thing I'm hoping to do in my next semester as I take high level courses at Swarthmore is like having two sets of notes. I don't know how practical this would be, but this is my imagination. Okay, this is how I want to study. Like when you are assigned a reading for a class, and I'm taking seminar next semester where I'll be assigned a lot of readings and which are going to be really complicated, especially in econ. Like having a set of note before, like your of the reading that you do before the class, and when you go into group discussion and have an understanding, then having a second set of notes and to compare and contrast, like your initial understanding versus what you got out of after the seminar discussion or the discussion with professor. So that would be one technique one can potentially employ in college level education.
Yeah, that's an interesting strategy. I feel like interesting for me to think about and see if I can apply in my classes as well. Because I mean, even at Minerva, we have readings, we take notes, then we come to class, we have discussions, which 99% of the time that discussion
Mhm.
with better clarity about the reading. And so two sets of notes and comparing the before and after. And I'm sure there's value in both the sets of notes. But it was a tough question. I think you did a pretty good job giving a bunch of tips. Everyone still has their own process, but you also did a great job at busting such a basic myth, which unfortunately still persists, is that many of my friends, the simplest excuse for not going to office hours is that they understood all the class content and they see no reason to go to office hours to discuss the class content. And I'm like, no, go to office hours, talk to professors about stuff beyond the classroom, get
Yeah.
personal, talk about their research, bring interesting books or articles or research you've been reading about to class, to the office hour. And I mean, I've overemphasized on a podcast that probably the single best way to start building an even more personalized relationship with a professor is to regularly be showing up to their office hours and showing that enthusiasm. So I'm really glad we touched upon that as well. Um, want to
Yeah, I could add a point in this. Uh, One interesting thing about office hours, like my most interesting experience in office hours, and this was not even in like econ or math, which are my majors. It was in a social other department of social science. And the reason I went to the professor's office hour, like it was a course I was taking in history, is that the professor has a Gandalf stick in his office. If you have watched Lord of Rings, you know how much the Gandalf stick means, right? Like you shall not pass. So yeah, I went to the office hours to talk to the professor about the Gandalf stick, and we ended up talking about a lot of things. We talked about the latest House of Dragons, Game of Thrones, and all these fantasy series that the professor is super passionate about. And I also really loved watching these movies, reading those books. So it was just like a very genuine connection, and it really helped me in my next office hours to talk about the paper I was writing because now I know the professor in a in a more personal level. So sometimes we just don't realize how similar we can be as individuals with our peers or our professors, but it's just that we don't get these avenues to talk about our personal stuff. So I think you can have then it necessarily doesn't have to be academic talk when you go and see your professor. So yeah, I think that's something I would also emphasize a lot for people who are about to embark on college, like make most out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think professors are probably among the most underrated resources at any university. Like I feel like everybody could and should be taking 2x or 5x the advantage of a professor. Like you've got somebody who's dedicated years to a field of study, who is so much more ahead of you in terms of professional and personal growth. They've seen so many students like yourself. So I feel like many of my professors also have just a broad understanding of people our age in terms of our fears
Yeah.
and our insecurities and our motivations and our journeys. So really, I mean, that's a great personal example to share. I've had office hours where I just spend an hour talking to a professor about everything apart from the stuff we learned in class.
Mhm.
And that's relationship building. We sometimes forget that they're humans. Is like all I'll end by saying is
Yeah.
we sort of view them as encyclopedias, but I mean, they're still humans with their lives outside of their research and outside of the academic bubble. If nothing else, talk to them about that life outside the academic bubble. Um, so you've traveled a long way from home, about halfway across the world. I'm sure there's a ton of struggles and challenges, which even I can relate to, of just being an international student. So having gone through this, and I'm sure Swarthmore semesters are intense as well. I want to begin by asking you, on a high level, what do you expect out of Swarthmore as a student? Where do you want to be after this 4 year education? Personally and professionally in life? Like how would you compare the before and after in an ideal scenario of Ashish, freshman versus graduating senior?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, and I think like I'm somebody who likes to make plans. I'm somebody who likes to have that constant zenith in my head, right? Like to have that North Star, to have it decided, to have it all figured out, to just say, hey, this is what I'm going to do in my first year, second year, third year, and this is where I'm going to go when I graduate. So when I came in at Swarthmore, and I think it a lot of times it also stems from the background you are from. So I'm a low income student. I'm first in my family to come to college. Uh, from Nepal. So when I was coming in at Swarthmore, I also had this, sense of family responsibility that I cannot only be pursuing my dreams. My dreams are also the collective dream of my family. And I need to make sure that we can have that economic mobility that this education can provide me. So I think that was my major motivation of, going to a degree where I'd be able to make the most out of it in the professional world. And the second part is like we are obviously international students, and you only get 1 year of OPT if you do a non-STEM major versus a 3 years OPT for a STEM major. So it was like sure shot. I need to have a STEM major, right? So that was kind of like forced on me by my own understanding and by my own consciousness because of my background. Like I need a STEM major. So I came in here thinking of I'll study computer science, but my true passion lied in like economics. Within my research, you must have tasted like political science, like some sort of intersection, trying to understand this. I guess like my country, my community, and econ and poli sci are like the two big overlaps that's there when you're trying to understand a community. So I was like, I'm going to do CS for the sake of the STEM, but I'll probably end up pursuing econ or a poli sci. Uh, so and that's where I started from. In my freshman summer, I was doing a project of implementing a leadership development training for public school students in Nepal. But at the same time, I was also preparing for coding interviews. So that's where I was in my first year at Swarthmore, where I was taking a bunch of computer science courses while preparing myself to go through that process of applying to tech internships. But as I gradually moved, but in the back of my mind, I always had that this tech world is going to be temporary for me. I really want to move on to this econ world, like get a PhD in economics or political science and be a researcher in that field or make contributions to that. But gradually, as I become more mature and as I became more pragmatic and got to know that, world doesn't work that way. You cannot just be an engineer today and then get into an econ grad school tomorrow. right? So you need to be applying to econ grad school from today or yesterday. Like you need to have that continuous journey. You cannot just jump. Maybe people have jumped, but it looked too daunting for me. And I was like, if I've already made it to a school like Swarthmore, I should be confident about pursuing my passion. I should not be constantly forcing myself to make trade-offs about things that I'm not as passionate about. It's not like I didn't enjoy computer science. I really enjoyed the classes. I loved the labs that we did. I had meaningful connections with my professor. And even for this summer, I had secured a research opportunity with a professor. So it was towards the end of my sophomore year where I realized I have to make that hard call. I cannot be doing CS research with a professor in my sophomore summer and then hoping to jump into the grad school route for econ. So I was like, I have to do something. So I was too late to work with a professor in econ department. That's why I came up with my own plan of let's do something of my own. But whatever I'll do in econ field so that I have that foundation. So I think that's the way my mindset had changed. But on a higher level, I think out of Swarthmore, I think after Swarthmore, I'm hoping to pursue a PhD in economics. That's my end goal right now. I'm really interested in development economics, international economics, labor economics. These kind of threads of economics that are tied into the global south. You need to understand what development is. You need to understand what international trade is and kind of stuff. But I'll see that like going to an econ PhD program is also very similar to going to a liberal arts school. Like you just go there saying, "Oh, I want to do a PhD in econ," but you don't have to know like what particular field of econ you want to work with. You decide in your like third year your specialty. So it's very different from STEM PhDs where you decide the lab where you want to do PhD in. So I have that liberty of thinking about it later on, but right now that's the path I see uh, for myself after Swarthmore. But on a more philosophical level, I think what I want to get out of Swarthmore is to have this kind of like hodgepodge of perspectives from the peers that I have at Swarthmore. It's really unique and it's really inspiring to see people coming here from all different walks of life and having a very different understanding of this world. And people at Swarthmore are some people who really want to make a difference in this world. So I think I want to carry that with me, carry the light they have, and that's how they call it in Swarthmore tradition. Like there is a light within you. So carry the light that my peers have, carry the critical thinking ability that this school has given me so far, and take it forward with me, so that I can challenge the way we think about the problems of global South. I think that's my big ambition after Swarthmore.
About half of the questions which I was eventually hoping to ask you as we go further on, you touched upon here, which I'm very happy about. Like you've given a sneak peek. This has been like a super comprehensive answer, and maybe we'll just actually dismantle this bit by bit. So I'll start with one of the very first things you said, where you spoke about being a more low income student and flying all the way to the US and having those additional family responsibilities as well. Would love to dive deeper on this with you. I guess speaking to international students specifically who are listening, the first thing that comes to mind as the major struggle or challenge for most would be homesickness, and just
Yeah.
that of being away from home. Apart from homesickness, would love to touch upon with you what are some other challenges and struggles. This could be like more high level or even daily struggles and challenges of just being an international student in the US as a college student.
Yeah, homesickness is very real. And I think I've found a new sickness as well. I think I would now I've become more nuanced with homesickness. So I've kind of differentiated it into homesickness and food sickness. Like those two are very real things. You start missing your family, you start missing your friends. And the way you make friends here, the way people talk here is very different from the way my friends talked with me in high school. The way we interacted with ourselves. And honestly, for me, I have two different personalities in the languages I speak. Like when I speak Nepali, I'm a completely different person than when I speak English, right? So it was very hard to like be speaking English 24/7 and be connecting with these people on a very personal level through a language that's not my mother tongue,
Yeah.
right? So that was a big challenge, and that also made me miss my friends a lot, miss the connections that I shared, and just not having your mom around, just not having your family and like your sisters around. It's a difficult thing, like when you are used to living with them for 20 years of your life and all of a sudden you are here, and sometimes like you feel like you made this big sacrifice for this education, but you almost feel like you're trapped in a matrix. You wake up, you go to class, you come back, you study, like you eat in a dining hall, like you are living a life in a matrix which feels very robotic and very repetitive. And sometimes you just ask, why, what the hell is this sacrifice for? So I think that was those were my big realizations in freshman year. Sometimes asking, why did I even make all these sacrifices when, I could have just been at home and lived in my comfort. So homesickness, it's terrible. I think it's a big struggle for international students, and it's very hard for other people to understand. Like I was talking with my friend this summer who lives like 1 hour drive away from Swarthmore, and was asking me when was the last time you went home. I was like, oh, I went home last summer, and he was like, oh, I can't imagine what it's to live away from home for a single year. Like, yeah, I can't imagine either because I lived with my family for 20 years. So it's a real challenge. Other than that, I think food sickness is really severe as well because especially if you are eating in your dining hall, like the food they serve, it might be good, but it's very different from what I was used to eating growing up. So you just miss the taste of spices. Like when they cook chicken, they just put salt and some pepper in it, and I'm not used to that, right? I'm not used to the grilled chicken. I'm used to all the spices, all the masala, and just savoring every single meal. I'm used to eating rice twice a day. They don't have rice, or at least they don't know how to cook rice. So just these things kind of like pinch you every single day. And for me, it's towards the later part of semester. So when I am in like the fourth month or the third month of my semester, like it starts hitting me really bad. Like I just feel like I need to get out of this dining hall and get some real food. So I think food sickness is a real big challenge as well. For me, as from like a South Asian origin, I feel that would be similar for people from different origins as well, because we have like a certain taste palette that the US does not cater to.
Mm,
Um, I think another big challenge as international student would be just navigating this country. Just like when you first go out in this public transport system to, I think a bigger challenge I have had so far, and luckily I've not had big health issues, but I just don't know how to go to a hospital in US. I just don't know. Like I've lived here for 2 years. I don't know how to book an appointment. I don't know how my insurance is gonna work. I don't know how do I see a doctor. I don't know how much time I have to wait. Like, I have no idea about it. So just these basic things of not knowing the healthcare system, this basic thing of not knowing a transport system in a new city, I think these are really big challenges. And these are things I never thought about before. Like I never had to double think about going to hospital when I was in Nepal, right? I had the privilege of being sick. I don't have that privilege anymore. At least that's what I feel. I think these are like these kind of, like tiny bits of challenges that you don't realize when you come in, but as you slowly live and evolve in this place, you just are so much surprised and shocked. Like, why does this country not have a good healthcare system, or why don't my people in the dining hall know how to cook rice? So yeah, I think you could also add on to that, like the challenges that we face as international students just settling in US.
um, Yeah, those are three big ones. I really love the distinction also between homesickness and food sickness. I've never heard the distinction on the podcast before, but it's been hinted at like so many times. That there's
Yeah.
home, there's family sickness, there's food sickness, there's like multiple layers to this. Um, and I guess, yeah, I mean, cultural nuances. And I really don't want to be getting into the depths of this year because I feel like I haven't had, it's only been a year. So I feel like I need more time to be better,
Mhm.
that I understand American culture. But just many things which are different, many things you have to relearn, unlearn, get used to a new way of greeting people and holding a conversation,
Yeah.
the level of formality which you treat a professor or a peer with, the level of like comfort and um, how close you get to a person, boundaries. A lot of things change when you have start to build relationships with people from different cultures. So that is probably what I'll add on. But really love this segment. And I'm sure it's also good to sort of get this out of your system. And like once you verbalize such challenges, even as I'm sure everyone listening will be going through such challenges when they start in a new country, being verbal and vocal about it, expressing to family, expressing to friends. I'm sure there's different support systems at university. It'll do you no good to sort of keep these things bottled inside you. Like it's always good to
Yeah.
verbalize. If not solutions, the least you will get is like a listening ear, which is also sometimes half the remedy. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm actually glad you made sort of this long and detailed list because that sets me up well for the next question, which will be a lot more impactful now. Is despite all these struggles and challenges, on a daily basis, what keeps you going? Like what keeps you from dropping out and heading back home and giving up? Swarthmore dream?
I think my biggest motivation is the joy I find in learning at Swarthmore. Just, going to class and just realizing like this unique education system. Because for me, to come from the public education system of Nepal, like I didn't take the A levels or the IB at Nepal, I did the government curriculum. Like our learning was so much based on memorization, right? And we take this one final exam at the end of this year, and like actually like the exams that I've taken for the first 10 years of my education don't really matter. Like it's the one big exam that matters and determines my life. I was suffocating in that system. Like I was a good student and I was excelling it, but fundamentally I heavily disagreed with. And to just be in an education system where you feel like you're learning every day, like your learning is the top priority rather than your grades or your final exam marks. You are not preparing for an exam, but you are preparing to learn. I think that just experience the joy of learning is so different, and it feels surreal to be coming from Nepal and to be studying in a college like Swarthmore, where learning is so much prioritized, where critical thinking is like indoctrinated when you. I think that's really beautiful. I think that's my big push, but also, you know, other than the big motivation, I think you also need to make, like have these strategic behaviors in your life. As in like how, I regularly call my family. My mom makes sure that I call her at least once a day, generally twice a day. Right. So just having that proximity with your family, just being able to learn what's going on in your country, what's going in your family's life, it just kind of removes the distance from each other. So I think that's a big push for me in terms of my motivation, like having these behaviors of where I'm connecting with my friends, like being able to. And I think another part is the group of international students I have. Right, so it's just not me going through this alone. It's
Yeah.
a group of us. It's a collective experience which we are constantly interacting, sharing, and yapping. We are frustrated and cursing and everything. Like, but then it's a collective experience that helps you. So I think my big three takeaways is like just enjoying the learning process and seeing the privilege in being able to learn the way we are learning here compared to what our peers are still learning in Nepal, like the memorization exam based curriculum. Second would be the being able to keep in touch with the life you have left behind, being in frequent calls with your family, your friends, being in loop, keeping updated. And third would be to make it a collective experience, not making it your own isolated experience, rather living it with friends who come from similar background.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And you did a great job summarizing at the end. Um, I'm sure we both have tons of friends in UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. There's definitely significant pros to studying in these countries over the US,
Hmm.
which have been touched upon by my friends on other episodes who chose the Canada or UK
Yeah.
over the US. I'm curious, in your case, as a student from Nepal, was there any specific pull factors to you for choosing to study in the US? Or did you have all these different countries in mind? And how did the country selection work as a process for you?
I think my concrete idea, like when I realized like I want to go abroad, I never had a second doubt on choosing US. It was mainly because of the financial aid and the caliber of education that we receive here in US. That was the main factor, and it was also like it was more like I was in the debating network and I was meeting up with all these fancy people, the best debaters of Nepal and who ended up getting into the top colleges in US. So I think that was my big push, right? To just look at these people that I admire so much and just want to be in the places that they were able to make it to. So I think that was my trigger for me. That was a trigger for me. So that because of that trigger, because of that appeal to US from the very beginning, I didn't think of uh, considering Canada, or UK, or Australia in the beginning. But as I moved through the process, I also realized that US was the right choice for me, because of the way education works in the other three countries. Like they don't really provide you generous scholarship. Even though if you are really capable, I think there are hardly handful of universities in these countries compared to US, where you
Hmm.
have the top 50 universities who can almost give you full ride, and then you have all these LSCs. And even with state universities, if you have a strong GPA or SAT, you can at least like get 50% off in your tuition, something like that. So I think that was like super appealing for me, and it was a big comforting factor because of my low income background. Just knowing that I have a shot at getting a full scholarship and being able to pursue my education without being a financial burden to my family. I think that was the biggest push for me in pursuing US.
Yeah, it's this interesting quirk about the US where it's also like the probably the most expensive education in the world,
Yeah,
coupled with like probably the best scholarships in the world. And so you just high risk, but also like high potential rewards of
yeah,
applying to these colleges and getting great financial aid packages. And probably something which hasn't been touched on as much on the podcast is there's this very tough, like I've had many friends in the situation where they get into a great college with like zero scholarship,
Mhm.
a slight, like and a more good or decent college with a great scholarship, and it becomes a huge trade-off between. So like that becomes a very important distinction to make, and there's a whole list of pros and cons. Um, but definitely, we've had talks about this on the podcast that for your own mental and emotional state, it's really wise to graduate with as minimal debt as is possible for you.
yeah,
So a great education is always at the forefront, but like just keeping financials at the back of your mind, I think is always a wise thing to, especially as an international student who's trying to like start life off in a new country.
yeah.
So glad we touched upon that as well. And I want to take it one level further and talk specifically about the major selection. You mentioned getting started with computer science, moving to economics and math, and then finally making that switch. And now it seems like you've dropped the computer science and you're going deeper into the econ and the math. Um, at that moment of time where you are finally making that decision that I'm just going to do computer science for the OPT and my interest lies in economics and math, can you walk through sort of what was your thought process like? And how did you actually find out that computer science wasn't the field for you? And why do you feel so strongly that economics and math is what you really enjoy doing?
Yeah, I think this will also give me an opportunity to talk about how major selection works in liberal arts schools because I think it's kind of different from a university where you go in decided, right? Where you say, I'm going to study computer science and major switch, it's a big process.
Hmm.
In Swarthmore specific, you don't really decide your major until the end of your sophomore year. So it's you are
Wow.
forced to decide a major only after 2 years of your education. So when I'm saying that I thought I was going to be when I'm saying that I was a computer science major, I was not really a computer science major. I was just like it was in my mind. That
Hmm.
was like my initial path that I had thought of for myself. So I was always like, I only had to take like 2 or 3 courses in the potential major to decide it as my major. So I always had the option. I think I could have clearly called like CS, math, econ, and poli sci. Like these were my four main courses in which I could have declared majors on. Initially, as I explained before, it was this sense of responsibility, the booming tech market, and just seeing these people, I don't know, make like $50 an hour as an intern. That was very appealing. Like I'd be honest with you, and I think it's valid to have that appealing to you as well because not everybody comes from that background, and for a lot of people, that economic mobility changes their life, right? And especially people from global south for whom family is so important, where their parents or their family has made so many sacrifices for them, it just feels wrong that you don't make that small sacrifice for that economic mobility. But for me, like just realizing that I can still make most out of my life, like I can still have a good, stable income and support my family, even with a degree in economics and math, just meant that it was like, it was a push factor for me towards my actual passion. Because even after graduating from undergrad, like you have these intermediate opportunities as research assistants, which give you decent pay. Like you don't really go to grad school nowadays. Like you work as a research assistant for a year or two. That can help you stabilize right after you graduate from college. So I think that just learning about how the industry works for economics
Hmm.
helped a lot. Second was it was only in your second year, like it's only in your second year after you start taking intermediate courses that you get to see the difference. Like, do I really like this field or not? But also when you go to these intermediate courses, you start having these relationships with professor, and at Swarthmore you get assigned with your advisors for helping you select your majors. So I really had deep conversations with my advisor. I told them like, this is my end goal. I want to get a PhD in economics. So how do I do that? and they strongly advised me to take more math courses. And now I'm realizing that myself. Now I'm doing this very empirical research that math is super important. You need to have understanding of mathematics to be able to make policy recommendations in the real world. Like, you cannot work with that data without knowing what the numbers mean, right? And you need the math background to be able to say that. So I think it was just knowing that math is really correlated, like super related with econ. And at a higher level, like when you take PhD level courses in your first and second year, econ is basically math. People say the letters disappear. It's just the Greek alphabets in economics when we're doing modeling and thinking of these advanced techniques. So it's a very mathy field. So it makes sense that you have a strong mathematical preparation so that you can at least survive the first year of your grad school. And third thing, in econ, and if somebody's really interested in econ, pursuing a graduate degree in econ, I think it's a good advice that grad schools use your mathematical competence as a filter. They don't really look at like how well you did in your econ courses, because econ courses in a certain level are not as complicated or not as rigorous as math courses. So it's really these advanced mathematical courses in like modern algebra or real analysis that are a bigger determinant, that show your strength as an applicant versus the grade you got in intermediate economics. So I think these are like a bunch of reasons that kind of enabled me to pivot towards I need to take math and econ instead of CS and econ, because initially my thoughts were I'll take CS and econ, and I still had that. I still have my CS OPT, right? But then by switching to math, I still retained the 3 years OPT while being able to pursue the things that I liked. I think that was my major motivation behind this switch.
Hmm. Yeah, those are some very useful suggestions for someone listening who's specifically interested in doing economics, also on a graduate level. I'm also hearing this for the first time. These pro tips of math becomes very important. And I love how you said it, the letters disappear and it's just numbers in like the first 2 years of
Yeah.
your graduate courses. So I like over quite a few podcasts with people, from pursuing very similar courses of economics and math. I feel like they're almost so intertwined that they can't be separated. Like another person on the podcast told very nicely that math brings economic concepts to life in the real world. You are saying that at a high level, econ is just math. So I think like, these are very interesting statements. And someone who's interested in pursuing just economics in college, I think it's good to think about pairing that with mathematics. And there are also other like good fields which are a good pair with econ, public policy or
Yeah.
psych. Thinking about like that intersection of two different fields, that which becomes like super valuable and creating that niche. Um, if you, I'm extrapolating, so feel free to correct me if I'm getting this wrong. But so you applying to a liberal arts college applied undecided, correct?
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing the major difference in your application versus someone who's applying for a specific major is that in your case, you have the liberty. In their case, let's say someone's applying for a CS major. Ideally, they're showing a lot of work in computer science, research, and internships, and so on. In your case, you have the flexibility to have been doing like 10 different things in different fields in high school, and you put all of those in your application because you're applying undecided. And so you're not really aiming for a specific major, you're just showing Swarthmore that you're interested in all these different fields. So would it be fair to say that this is a huge difference between applying to a liberal arts school where you're applying undecided versus like a large public university where you're pretty much set on that major? Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's a, no, it's a very interesting question, and it's a subjective question, right? Like, and I think it can have multiple answers. For me, I think the biggest advantage for students who are applying undecided is that they have the ability to craft their application as they want. I think you could think of it as a way, like, I think in terms of common application as well, like where you have to write an essay, right? So you have options of like, I think, I don't know, may say 10 different prompts, and there's a final prompt which says write an essay that you want. So I think that's the big difference in these two application process, where when you are following a proper prompt, like you are bound by that prompt. And that is really helpful for people who know that the prompt is right for them. Like somebody who has done physics Olympiad, loves physics, has done a physics research, is running like a physics mentorship group for high school kids. Like you have to say that you want to study physics. Like that's so much apparent in your application. But for other people say who's somebody like in my case, I was running a community project. I was running projects to empower women and gender minorities. I was working in like youth leadership project. I was doing a cultural exchange with Japanese students. Like it does not really tell you a comprehensive story. Like it does not lie within a prompt. So it's for me uh it's it's a big advantage when there is this option to apply undecided, where I can weave together these stories and say that this is my story and this is me, but not have it under a certain prompt. Uh, so I think that's the main idea that's in my head when I think about applying undecided versus decided. But it's also helpful to maybe outline the mix of interests you have. Like don't apply undecided just because your ECAs are not cohesive. Apply undecided if you really are undecided, as in like for me, when I started, like I really like political science, I really like economics. I was thinking of studying computer science. So for me, it made sense that I want to do something in its intersections. At colleges, like there are so many students who find this particular niche and find this particular intersection. So for them as well, who have been working on a very small field, they don't even know if that field exists in your school, but they find it interesting and they want to talk about it. I think that's where you can really use the strength of being undecided and talking about your certain passion of, hey, I want to help this community, or I'm developing this app, which is an intersection of, I don't know, social justice and computing, but I'm not really sure if I want to be social science major or a computer science major or both or neither. So I think when you have that kind of confusion or a very niche or an intersection, I think that's where you can really use the strength of being an undecided major.
Mm. And no harm being a little strategic with your application, especially when you're applying to a school where there's a lot of flexibility with changing majors. If all your
Yeah,
majors are physics, like be that apply for the physics major and we can switch later on if we need to. As you said, if your ECs are sort of in two different fields of, like, as you said, social science and computer science, go ahead and apply undecided and you can sort of switch and see what you're interested in later on. But step one is getting into the institution in the first place. So I think
yeah.
go ahead. I feel
And
like
liberal arts really encourage you to explore as well, right? And that's where things change, because I have friends who did economics Olympiad for Nepal. They're not studying economics, right? I have friends who did physics Olympiad for Nepal. They don't study physics anymore. So, like when you were in high school, your passions could be different. But when you go to a liberal arts where you can really explore and find new passions, I think you should take leverage of it. In a strategic way, I think it would, like college application is a strategic process as well. It would be helpful to give thoughts on if you are a mainstream major, just like thinking about if you're a computer science major, there probably will be like 2,000 more applicants to Swarthmore who are going to be computer science major. So thinking about, will you be the best computer science major applying from India to Swarthmore? Like if you are not that, like you don't really have a shot at Swarthmore, right? So like I think you need to also be sometimes be strategic about evaluating your profile and see, are there other people who have done more exceptional stuff with computer science than me? And if you are like doing intersection of computer science with something else, maybe there's an advantage of like going undecided and just enabling yourself to explore without that pressure. But if you're somebody who feels like you have done exceptional things in computer science and you can clearly feel like you would outstand the competition, like go ahead and apply as a computer science major, and Swarthmore will probably take you if you are one of the best CS applicants from India at Swarthmore. So
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, this is exactly why I love getting current students on a podcast is um, these are like pro tips which you just won't find by Googling. You have to be
yeah,
talking to
definitely.
current students in the university. And then most 99% of the time, I think we're all happy to help. We're happy to help you craft your applications in the best possible way to give you the best chance of getting in. So speak to the students who have been there, done that. We've made mistakes as well, which we can share with you so you avoid repeating them. And we're sort of there to hold your hand. And so that's the idea of the podcast overall. And I hope that learning from this podcast is a motivation for like listeners to really reach out and connect with students at their dream universities. There's no harm in sending those 10 LinkedIn messages. Even like 1 in 10 replying could be potentially life changing. Like forget about
Yeah.
that. Um, Speaking of which, I think we've sort of lingered on this here and there, and it's time I actually asked the question. I'm sure listeners are wondering what was special and unique in your application which made you get into Swarthmore in the first place. So would love if you could touch upon specific aspects of the application which you felt really helped you be unique and differentiated as a student. Plus, if you have any higher level advice to give to someone who's currently working on their applications to the US, to a liberal arts college, anything you'd like to say to them as well.
Yeah, in general, I think I've reflected on it a lot. Now, having spent 2 years at Swarthmore, just thinking about why did I even make it here? Like, why me and why Swarthmore? And now I think about it, I think I'm a pretty good fit at Swarthmore. Uh, I think it's a college that really matches my interest. But while applying to Swarthmore, I'm being brutally honest. I have no idea what Swarthmore was. It was a very random decision of applying ED2 at Swarthmore. I wanted to apply ED to a liberal arts college and I wanted to apply to a good school. I looked up Swarthmore. It felt interesting. It was the last day of the deadline. I just applied to it. So I can't give you a lot on why you chose Swarthmore other than, oh, it had good financial aid. And that was the college that caught my eye. And I think let's go for it. I really started learning about Swarthmore after getting in. So before applying to Swarthmore, I had opportunity to come for a scholarship interview in Rollins College in Florida. So that was my first time in US. So I had started to see like how my application is resonating to admission officers because I really got to talk with admission officers and started to learn like what they actually value. And just in terms of Swarthmore as well, it's pretty consistent with Swarthmore's application because it was pretty much the same application I submitted to two schools. I think the biggest strength of my application is my personal character. Like, there's a thing about academics. Obviously, like Swarthmore is a very rigorous school, and if you are not one of the top students of your class, uh, you will not get into Swarthmore. That's like very obvious thing because of its academic rigor. But other than that, I think Swarthmore values personal character a lot. In terms of how you have overcome challenges in your life and how you think about this world and how do you want to make a difference in this world? How do you critically see the world around you? I think these were the elements that I was really able to incorporate in my application, especially through my application essay. In my Common App essay, I talked about growing up in a low income family and family responsibilities that I acquired at a very young age. I was raised by a single mother, so in a very poor neighborhood in Kathmandu, so life was never easy, right? It was filled with sacrifices. It was filled with realizations of why these sacrifices are important for a bigger goal, for a bigger economic mobility. So I think I was really honest in my essay and I really gave them a glimpse of where I come from and what I am and what I want to do with my story. Like, what do I want to do with the learnings I have had growing up in a poor family in Kathmandu? So that was my big like display of personal character and strength in my Common App application. In my essay to Swarthmore, I did not respond to why Swarthmore. I'm really bad at those. I'm really bad. Like, if you ask me why Swarthmore right now, I think I don't really have a good answer. But I talked about myself and my activism during high school. I talked about how I was challenging the notions of our conservative society when I was bringing in survivors of like women who are survivors of violence. I was bringing in LGBTIQ activists to talk with students and challenging the very conservative notions that we hold on to. So that was my display of somebody who wants to make a difference with my lived experience. So I think those were the only two essays that I submitted to Swarthmore, honestly. Beyond that, in terms of my activities, I was really involved with social justice activism. I had started a club that advocated for gender equality. I was working with victims of acid attack. I was working with LGBTIQ activists. I was also engaged in cultural exchanges where I was bringing these perspective with international students. I was working with students from Japan. Other than that, one big thing in my application, which I think this could be a tip as well, which I use the additional information section for, where in essays you are really telling a story, right? Like, you are weaving together a story in a very like creative manner, where you are playing with words, you are playing with emotions and everything. In my additional information section, I put it bland out. I just gave facts about the program that I did. It was a very big project that I did with UNDP as a project manager. So I was leading the project to mobilize 300 volunteers across Nepal to raise awareness about waste disposal during COVID-19. So it was a 4 months long project. with enormous funding and enormous responsibility to mobilize the volunteers. So I just talked about it. I was just like, this is the project I did. These were the number of volunteers. Like kind of like a resume, like where I'm giving the facts and talking about the responsibilities I did. So in general, I think a big picture like that an like a admission officer could get from reading my essays or the additional description section or my activities is that this is a student who's really good at academics, but has spent a lot of time thinking about society, thinking critically about the challenges that lies within his society, despite overcoming several hardships as a child. And then take it like not doing this, not limiting himself to like high school activism or just like high school clubs, but really going out in the open to lead massive projects across Nepal. So I think that was a big picture of leadership and community action that they could see. Beyond that, I think I had a letter of recommendation from my teachers who really spoke about my background and how I was as a student in the classroom. I also got a letter of recommendation from an organization that I work for. I got it from my immediate leader. I think another tip is it was a national organization with local chapters, so I had a choice. I was really like I was really well connected in that organization, so I had a choice of I could either ask a recommendation from the head of the national organization or head of like my immediate supervisor. I opted to get a recommendation from my immediate supervisor, which was just like an ordinary VP in our local chapter, right? Like she doesn't have the big name of vice president or president of this big international youth organization in Nepal. But I feel like having a recommendation from somebody who intimately knew me, my working style, my thinking style, also really helped. So I think just summarizing the strengths, I think it was my personal character, my academic performance, as well as my ability to think beyond myself and think about my community that I think really made me outstand among applicants, maybe from Nepal who applied to Swarthmore. And I think it's also a unique profile in a way that a lot of applicants have very academic focus of, participating in Olympiads, participating in like national and international academic competitions beyond Olympiads as well, getting engaged in research and more. I think I did not have any of those, but I had a really strong community impact profile. And second, I think two tips I can think of are like use the additional information section to put in like you don't have to write an essay, just give them facts about what you have done. And also when you are thinking about letter of recommendation, don't go for big names. It doesn't have to come from the head of your organization, rather rely on people who have worked closely with you and talk a lot about you versus somebody who would give you a very general like a letter of recommendation. It was a very long answer, but yeah, if you have any further clarifications that I can give.
No, that's great. We touched upon essays, we touched upon extracurriculars. We also touched upon letters of recommendation, which I might have followed up on, but you also, that's a pro tip you gave. 100% agree. Someone who knows you in and out versus the title will always be the more nuanced and specific letter of recommendation. And a specific nuanced letter of recommendation any day is greater than something that is more generic, which honestly feels like a copy paste template. Like the VP of XYZ national organization you mentioned would probably write a very similar letter for you and 100 other students. The specific
Yeah.
of your letter, I'm sure, has never written a letter like that before. So being very strategic, like I think letters of recommendation is something not we've not spoken about enough on this podcast as well. But it's a good third person perspective of someone who knows you well, but is also sort of fighting for you and advocating and showing you in the best possible light to really give that third person perspective to Swarthmore regarding the type of student and human being that you are. So being very strategic about those as well is great. And even at university, I'm sure it's important for you in your case, because you're doing the PhD, to be strategic about letters of recommendation from your profs as well,
Yeah.
towards the PhD program. But I think we covered a lot of different topics there. I don't have specific follow-ups, but I'm sure this gives a good holistic idea to viewers as to what is like one potential path to get into Swarthmore. Like there's 100 different paths.
Yeah, of course.
What you did great, I think, was finding out or noticing that many of the other students who got in had those academic qualifications, accepting that you don't have them, and like, what is the alternate route I can take to show myself as different from all these other people who are also great in their own way? Like, what is my playing to my strengths? My strength was like in your case, that community service angle, and like focusing and drilling down in the application and the essays. So always playing to your strengths, not trying to um, take something that is mediocre and hype it up to like this huge extent because you just
Yeah.
want to see. Um, but yeah,
I think one other point I could highlight is also like not following the formula, because I think a lot of times, like, and it's especially important for people like listening who are about to apply to colleges. Sometimes, like, I've seen, like, I, I mentor a lot of Nepali applicants. I look over their essays. I, talk with them and help them navigate ECAs. They almost try to copy paste application profile of previous successful applicants, and I think I see a big risk in that. Just in a basic level, if somebody went through like an Olympiad and competed in another international competition and like did this particular work for this particular organization, like if you want to follow that and if you think that will also get you into the same university, I think that's a big danger because they already have a person who is exactly like that, right? So I feel like a lot of times people come to me and ask like what are the ECS I did, and then they again ask like how can I do the exact same thing. I think it's important you take inspiration from it, but carve out your own path. Because if you try to do the exact same thing, like this university is not going to accept you at all because they already have the exact same person. They don't want like, and I think even you have must have experienced this in your college, and I've experienced that in my college as well. That the Nepali students that they have accepted are not replicas of each other. They are very distinct individuals. Like they're completely different from each other. That's my experience of looking at the students from Nepal who have got into Swarthmore. I think one final tip I would give for common app application or just crafting an application that I think I missed was not creating a lot of overlaps. Like it's important to have a cohesive story, but for me, in my case, as I told you, like I talked about my high school activism in my why Swarthmore essay, so I didn't have any of it in my common app. I talked about my UNDP project, my additional information, so I didn't get a letter of recommendation from UNDP. I didn't need it because I already talked about it. And the organization that I got my letter of recommendation from, I did not talk about it in my essays or my additional information. It was just a part of my activity section. So that you can give them like a different angle. Every time they read a letter, every time they read an essay, they get a new insight on who you are. And I think that also creates like a lot of, like like thought bubbles on their head about who you are as a person, over trying to keep on emphasizing that, hey, I went to this competition, here's the letter of recommendation from that same competition, here is my essay on how I felt going to that competition or something like that. Like don't make it about a single activity or don't make it about a single job that you have, but try to give a broader picture of who you are. uh, Along those lines, another important thing would be, don't forget to talk to them about your identity as a person, because a common thing that I see is like people, just use this essay section to just talk about activities rather than themselves. Because when we come from these unique background from South Asia, I think we all have a very distinctive story to share. So make sure that you kind of reflect on who you are and what's the story that you have, rather than just making a competition or making a project your whole identity when you talk about yourself with the essay. I think, yeah, those would be my closing tips on crafting together an application.
yeah, I mean, I you've said a lot here. Probably the last thing I'll say to wrap up this section on the university application is I would challenge listeners to think about how their application can create such a unique niche that the admissions officer is seeing an application like yours for the first time. Like they have never encountered this niche before. And so when I was applying to Minerva, I was thinking about this a lot as well. That I have I've seen seniors who were like who had this academic research niche and someone who was super into social activism. And then I took a step back and said, what are my strengths? Like, what's the common thread across all of my activities? And what I did was I created this content creator niche for myself. And I just pitched myself to Minerva as this content creator, this writer, podcaster, artist, person who just still loves to pump content out there in the world and create meaning with it. And that's how I like that common thread is very important across different activities, also showing the diversity. But like I'm assuming that this was a niche that like very few, if not none of the
Yeah.
applicants of that year. Um, just to conclude our entire very long discussion, but I'm like very valuable and insightful discussion. on just university selection and application. In terms of like taking a step back from the application, looking at the university selection, if there's a student who's sort of on a high level considering whether they want to be applying to a majority of liberal arts small schools or like larger public universities, what do you think is a right way to like mindset wise approach this? Like how can what's like a basic pro and cons list, or what's how can someone figure out whether they'd be a better fit for like the liberal arts option or the larger public university option?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I think like every applicant should think about it first. I'm a very pro liberal arts person because I go to a liberal arts college, and that's the only experience I've had, and I truly enjoy it. So, my ideas would definitely sound more pro liberal arts, but just to think of some drawbacks on liberal arts, like going to a small school can feel suffocating at times. And I think we talked about the bubble of being in a very small school. And these small schools are generally in the middle of nowhere, right? Like they would be in the middle of a jungle, like Swarthmore is in the middle of like a suburban place where you don't really have anything to do right in your front gates of your college. Like you have to take a train to Philadelphia to find something interesting. And that could be really suffocating for a lot of people. And that could be a big thing on your mental health because I
Mm,
grew up in Kathmandu, like I was living in a city, right? Like the whole city is at my footsteps, and that was super important to me. And just being so far from the city sometimes has its impacts.
mm,
And for me, it's not a big impact. I'm okay with the trade-off. For a lot of people, that might not be okay at all, and that's completely fine. I think second impact of going to a small school is and it has both pros and cons. Like the community is really small. It's super close knit. You might admire that close knit community and finding like affection in these limited people, or sometimes you just get annoyed with it. And in a close knit community, it's very easy to get a sort of family like feeling, but it's also really easy to find somebody who's not like you at all. Like just the probability of finding a friend who can truly understand you just decreases when you go to a very small school. I think so. If somebody is struggling to find that kind of community, like if somebody has that kind of particular preference, and I can give you a very good example. I have a friend who goes to like a predominantly white institution in Midwest, and they have very limited international students or students of color, right? So when you are in a predominantly white institution and you are the only student who comes from your background, like that small tight knit community in middle of nowhere is suffocating, right? So that can be a big con when you think of a small school.
mm,
For big universities, just the opposite. You have so many options. A lot of times they're located in cities. Even if they are not located in cities, they would have a mini city around them because it's just a university town. So I think there's a big advantage of being going to that big university. Uh, my personal, drawback on Swarthmore would be the niches, of course, you can take. Like Swarthmore is great. We have small class sizes. We have these brilliant professors, but they don't offer the wide range of courses that I would have access to if I went to a bigger university. Like I'm super passionate about politics and economy of Nepal or South Asia and or the global South, right? And that's what I want to learn. Like I want to learn about the history of South Asia. I want to learn about the economy of South Asia. And I just don't have the option. There's not a single professor in Swarthmore who teaches or does research about South Asia
mm,
in the economics department or the poli sci department as per se. So that's a big problem for somebody who has such a niche interest that you have to rely on yourself to build that expertise. Like every time I get an opportunity to write a paper, I just talk about South Asia so that I'm able to explore my interest. But if I went to a big university, probably I would have like five courses offered in my econ department that just focus on global South or South Asia. So in terms of academics, I think the course offerings are very different. I think third drawback would be because of liberal arts, like if you are a computer science major in Swarthmore, you can only take like 8 courses in computer science. We are
mm,
taking 3, 4 courses per semester. That means that's only 1 year of your total courses for your major. Versus if you go to a big university, you probably end up taking like 20 courses in computer science. So that just gives you a lot of expertise, right? When you have taken this wide array of courses, and the same thing, you'll be able to find your niche. At Swarthmore, there are niche courses, but it might not be your niche course. So I
mm,
think that's another major academic drawback of going to a small school. Other than that, I think it's also social life. About especially at Swarthmore, the party culture is not that huge. In big universities, there is always a big party culture, and you can always find people who are like you, and you can always find people to hang out with.
Mm.
Swarthmore, it's very hard. If you don't fit in, it's a big struggle. So yeah, just summing up, I think the small size, big size difference comes down to just not being able to find like people who are like you. It can get really difficult. It can be a big toll on your mental health also, but in terms of academics, of not finding that right professor or not finding that course that you really want to take.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think this decision is super subjective. Like there are people who would love that small community who want to take only those 8 computer science courses because they have these 3 or 4 other interest areas which they would
Yeah,
not have a chance to pursue in a bigger college. So it becomes so subjective as to the type of person you are, the type of student you are, the type of friend you are. Asking those deep introspective questions before making such decisions, I think becomes so important, because just the size of your institution will affect so many things which you've just touched upon regarding your experience there. And there's definitely no way to say that Swarthmore is better. Like on an objective level, generally, it would be very unfair to say Swarthmore is better than a bigger university or vice versa, because it's just so dependent on the student. Maybe you found it to be a great fit. Maybe someone else really hates the experience there and wants to go to a bigger
yeah,
school. But very difficult to make that switch once you're actually in the institution. So I always feel like it's better to be 2 steps behind, and be making that decision versus being too late. And then you can make the switch, but it's sort of much more difficult. So yeah, I'm glad we touched upon this. You sort of gave a good list, as well as we also gave some potential like things to be thinking about regarding the choice of size of institution. Um, we've done honestly, I've dragged this conversation a little bit, but I also enjoyed like picking your brain on different aspects of the application, the school selection. And so this has been a long but I think very holistic and comprehensive section on before university. Like we've touched upon the entire path of your high school days leading up to Swarthmore, to finally come to the main suspense point of Swarthmore itself and your experience there for 2 years. I've just got a couple of questions about your university days specifically. Would love to start off with beyond the classroom, outside of your academics, and I'm sure that Swarthmore is academically rigorous and a majority of time goes there. What do you spend the remainder of your time doing over the course of the semester?
yeah. It's academically rigorous, so a lot of time just gets spent studying and preparing for classes. But I really love spending time with my friends. I have a close knit friend group, and I think we all end up having those kind of close knit friend group once we go to university, almost like your support system. And honestly, like being in a friend group is also like a very strategic commitment where I've come to realize that you need to invest in your friendship, right? So making sure that I am doing those investments, I'm giving time to my friends, I'm spending time with them, listening to what's happening in their lives and sharing about what's going on with me. So I think that's a big part, like just connecting with people, listening to their day-to-day lives, talking about classes and things beyond classes, just how they are feeling. I think that's a big part of going to a very small school where you can have these very honest and authentic conversations. Other than that, I have my campus jobs, and they really allow me to work towards things that I'm passionate about. For the past 2 years, I was working to support career development of students from diverse backgrounds. So I started an initiative where we provide free clothing to free professional clothing to students who are first generation low income or internationals. Like working on those sort of initiative is really fulfilling to me. It feels like my way of giving back to my community. Other than that, like Swarthmore is a community of kind of like radical left thinkers where we try to radically reimagine this world, and we kind of engage in those activities in terms of like through unionization or just Marxist book clubs or more. So I have this bunch of people where we talk about this ideas of reimagining this world, and reimagining our lives at Swarthmore. So I spend a lot of time organizing in our union. I'm a resident advisor, so I also have my job as a RA resident advisor. Where I take care of my dorm, my community. I'm pretty sure, like, if somebody's living on campus, they would know their RAs very soon once they get into college. I don't want to go into depths of what it's like to be an RA, but yeah, we have our union. We RAs recently unionized at Swarthmore, so that also takes up a lot of my time. Beyond that, we travel to Philadelphia. We see places around. We go to places. We go to restaurants. I think that's pretty much my life outside Swarthmore.
How open do you generally find Swarthmore management to the views and opinions of students like yourselves?
Swarthmore is supposed to be a very left-leaning institution. Like historically, it has been a place where students with a radical perspective of the world come and think together. That is reflected in the courses that are taught and the professors who are here who stand in solidarity with students. Even in terms of issues of crisis in Middle East, we had sit-ins in our fall semester. Then we had the longest encampment in the Philadelphia region in our spring semester. So there is a lot of protest activism always going on in our campus. But at times, as we all know, during this Middle East crisis, the way higher ed has reacted to students is very appalling, I think. And we see some traces of it at Swarthmore as well. And that's very frustrating for students who are putting in so much effort to bring a meaningful change in this world. And in terms of our reunion as well, I have our first bargaining of summer tomorrow, right after this podcast, to which we are preparing for, but we have not been able to make meaningful conclusions with the administration so far. So it's been a frustrating experience, but for me, I try to take it as a leadership experience or try to take it as a very unique experience that I would not be getting anywhere else. It's frustrating, but I try to see the camaraderie that I'm making with my friends as the big gain from it, rather than just frustration. So it's actually fun and joyous for me to be doing these things beyond classroom. In terms of moderate ideas, Swapper is very supportive. If you go for the left, then you face these restraints from administration, but I don't think it's different, or it might be even more liberal compared to other institutions. But that restraint is still there.
What do you think are, and this could be specific to Swarthmore, and I'm sure a lot of this answer will also generalize to universities at large in the US. What do you think are some pretty underrated resources which most students take for granted or are just completely unaware of, which you feel are actually super useful, and like why don't students know more about this XYZ resource? Anything come to mind?
Uh, yeah, I think at Swarthmore, like we talked about professors, right? How you mentioned it yourself, how you think professors are underutilized by students. I think I definitely agree with it. Uh, Other than that, I think there are a lot of support that we receive at Swarthmore through administration. Like for me as an international student and a first generation low income student, we have specific offices that provide support in every possible form. I think that is kind of underutilized, or it's not even underutilized. I think it's just people don't know of it, right? You need to, a lot of times when you come from marginalized backgrounds, you need to dig these resources. Nobody hands them out to you. So I think these resources of the support that administration at Swarthmore, especially from the international office and the first generation low income office, starting from they provide you airfare when you travel to the school if you are a low income student. To they provide you with computers if you say you don't have optimal computer for your college. They even cover your computer repairs. To they provide you emergency funding. They
Wow.
provide you additional funding if you're attending a conference or more. So you just have to, as you said, like knock on the door and ask. And
Hmm.
there are so many opportunities there. But a lot of times, I think at first students just don't know, or
Yeah.
students feel like it's just not worth it. But I have had experience of working very close with administration through my campus job, and I know like there's so many resources out there. I think which are underutilized, and I would consider them like the underrated resources at Swarthmore.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest reasons why even like family and friends pushed me to start a podcast is that they said that I'm just such an inquisitive person. You keep asking questions. They just felt like this is the natural path for you. I agree. I tend to ask a lot of annoying and stupid questions in general. But one thing which is like for sure I've realized in my life at Minerva is that many a times asking those two extra questions has led me to open doors and unlock certain resources and opportunities, which my friends who are afraid of asking that stupid question just couldn't unlock or couldn't open.
Yeah.
And that has benefited me greatly and sort of set me on a different trajectory than people who are afraid to take that first step. So I think, especially at university, there's so many resources out there, but nothing is sort of served to you on a platter. Like you have to have
Yeah.
take that first step, ask the question, and 9 out of 10 times you will find some sort of benefit from asking that question, even if it's a stupid question. If you're afraid to ask it in class, go to office hours and ask a stupid question when you're alone with the professor. Um, but I think no harm, and there's generally always an unlimited potential upside with just the risk of sounding dumb for a few minutes, which I can bear with if I'm potentially getting access to this great opportunity or this great resource. So yeah,
Yeah.
the power of questions, I think, is what Minerva has taught me, and I think university hopefully teaches a lot of our listeners here. And stepping forward and asking for things versus a lot of us who are honestly used to parents handing things or teachers handing things to us on a platter back in high school.
Yeah.
One of the biggest differences between university and high school in my mind is that. Um, Wanted to also touch upon, now that we're on a similar topic of asking and going forward and resources and opportunities, would love to touch upon beyond the classroom. What does professional growth look like for you at Swarthmore? Like, what are you doing beyond studying hard, which I'm sure you're doing, to sort of advance your career interests?
It's really interesting at Swarthmore because when you think of the top liberal arts schools and you see all the placement, you would imagine like there is a very big emphasis in general about like placements in industry. It's very, I think contrary, Swarthmore is very much focused on academics, and there's also self-selection bias of like students who want to pursue grad school come to Swarthmore. I think like statistically as well, it has one of the maybe the highest PhD placement per capita in the entire world.
Wow.
So that's like a big strength of Swarthmore, where these faculties and this department has this enormous strength of placing students in top PhD programs around the world. But on contrary, when it comes to industry, there is not that big of an emphasis because you are going through very rigorous courses which will earn you great level of recommendations from the seminars and which would enable you to develop these academic skills and write great papers, right? But the great paper you write or the strong letter of recommendation you'll have from your professor won't matter much when you're applying for like mainstream jobs like tech internships or consulting, banking, or like jobs in like NGOs or more. So because there is a very big I think gap between the industry and the academic world. Like the industry does not really consider your GPA or the rigor of your school or how you perform on these difficult courses. All they want is you to pass a particular online assessment that they send you out. Right. So because of that, I think there's like students are not able to find a lot of time to invest in these professional growth. I think that's a big struggle. And when I was thinking myself, like when I was thinking about going into the tech industry, I was having a very hard time to do anything else outside of the academics. Like I was having a hard time to learn from the YouTube or make websites or build an app. Like I just can't find time in the first place. Second, they don't teach us that in our courses. It's very much academic driven, research driven rather than industry driven. So I think there's a gap. There's a clear gap. And if you are sure shot on attending school, like attending going to industry, Swarthmore may not be the best school in the world. Like you will still do great if you come to Swarthmore, but there might be better schools for you. If your sole goal is to land a job in a big company, but if your goal is to learn, enjoy this liberal arts curriculum, enjoy this rigor, at the same time connect with people from all these different perspectives, you can still come here and land a job, but it's going to be more difficult than going to a big name school. And I think in industry, people don't really know what Swarthmore is. But in academia, they really know what Swarthmore is and its rigor and they really appreciate it. I think it's the very opposite in industry when it comes about recognition and preparation that Swarthmore has to offer.
Very interesting that you mentioned this because I'm going to have a conversation in about a week from today with a girl who ED'd Swarthmore and then somehow found a loophole to not go to Swarthmore and go to Claremont McKenna instead because she was very clear about not wanting to do higher education and getting the world of work. So I'm excited to see what that conversation brings, and I'm so glad that you also brought up this distinction for listeners as to Swarthmore being more focused on someone pursuing higher education and a bit less focused on the industry versus other liberal arts colleges like CMC and the others, which are more like pre-professional in that sense. But if
Yeah.
someone is clear about wanting to pursue a master's slash PhD, do you think Swarthmore is a great environment for them?
I think my understanding of master's degree has really changed after coming to undergrad in US. I thought master is like, you do your high school, then do bachelor's, then master's and PhD. Like apparently that's not true in US. Well, after bachelor's, you have two different paths. Where if you want to go to a more research oriented path, that's PhD, and if you want to go to a very professional path, that's master's. So I don't think there is a harm, and like I guess you would have a stronger chance of landing a great master's program if you come to Swarthmore because master's program do value the academic rigor and the letter of recommendations. But I feel like you still have a stronger shot in going to PhD program. And it's almost like when we work so close with our professors, it's almost like we want to be like them, right? That's why a lot of Swarthmore students go to grad school in PhD programs rather than master's program. But I think it's a very dependent on the field as well. I know people who pursue arts directly go into master's in fine arts program rather than going to PhD. Like you can still be a professor even with a master's in fine arts degree. Like if you're pursuing economics, like people don't really do masters in economics. That's not really necessary. Like you can directly go to PhD program unless you want to go and work in like public policy or something. So it depends. But I think for masters, Swarthmore is still good. Like if it's a job that values a letter of recommendation and academic rigor, Swarthmore is really good. If not, there might be better colleges out there.
Mm. Yeah, pro tips from an insider. So I mean, I'm sure that so many different types of listeners listen to this episode. It's up to like each and every person to sort of decide. Every college will have pros and cons. Every college has specific departments where they're much stronger in, and specific departments they're less stronger in. As a student, it's actually our responsibility to do that research beforehand, speak to the current students like yourself and others, get an understanding of what we're getting into. Because I genuinely feel like there is a school out there for almost every type of student, and the unfortunate like failure of just the information about universities out there, which hopefully this podcast improves, is most students might have a dream school and they just never know about it, and they end up attending a school
Yeah.
with it. So hopefully this podcast is like one tiny step towards bridging that gap. Um,
Yeah, I think there are a lot of students like me, right? Like I applied to Swarthmore not knowing what it was, and I got in, and then I realized what it was, and thankfully it was a fit. Imagine like I was so much determined in going to industry, and I like no interest in going to academia. Like I might have had a hard time, man. Initially, when I learned that Swarthmore is one of the most rigorous school in US, I was scared. I was really scared that like I'm no one from Nepal like going into this rigorous program, and I was imagining all these like students who have done like 11 AP courses coming to Swarthmore from US. Like, how would I even sit in a class with them? How would I even have the same learning curve as them? I was really scared. So I think it's really important for you to understand, especially if it's an early decision. Like you have to know the college. You need to know what are its strengths and what are its drawbacks, and do you fit in those strengths and drawbacks or not?
Very true. I feel like the last two or three questions and just the last 15, 20 minutes of topics you've been revolving around really begs me to ask the next question, which is how would you describe sort of the ideal Swarthmore student? What kind of student and human being do you think would be a great fit for Swarthmore?
That's a very difficult question. But I think in general, somebody who loves learning, who loves critically thinking about the world around them, and who really wants to make a difference in this world. I think those values are essential for being in a Swarthmore community because if you don't really believe in those, and if everybody else around you believes in that, like you are going to have a clash of values, and you will find it difficult to like fit in, right? But I feel like a lot of international students do adhere to these values. They want to make a positive change. They're not just going to university because they want to be a millionaire. They want to be go to university because they care about this world. That
Hmm.
has been my major experience of like mentoring a lot of Nepali students who apply to college. Other than that, I think you need to, and it's generally true for a small liberal arts school, like you need to be caring and you need to be empathetic because you are going to have a very real personal connection with everyone. And you will have this intimate connection, which would require a lot of effort from your end. And you would need to be compassionate. You need to be empathetic to the people that you meet. You need to show grace. I think these are things that you don't necessarily have to come up with because our relationship with our friends or the way our society works is very different. But once you come in, I think if you are somebody who cannot have that empathy or you cannot show deep care for others, it's hard to fit in a very close-knit community. Uh, Other than that, I think that other than that, it just goes back to the academic rigor. Like if you don't enjoy the process of learning, this college can get really difficult for you. But if you are somebody who truly enjoys learning, there's so much for you to explore at Swarthmore. I think it would be worth explaining about the honors program at Swarthmore for listeners who are thinking to apply at Swarthmore. Like we have this 100-year-old tradition of honors program where you take higher level seminars during your junior and senior year. And at the end of your senior year, once you are done with all of your semester exams, you have an honors week where you take where an external examiner comes in to test you. So in my case, when I'm doing econ and math honors, I will be taking 3 seminars in economics and I'll be taking 1 seminar in maths. So I'll have 4 honors courses in total throughout my junior and senior year. So at the very end of my senior year, there would be 4 external examiners who will test me on these 4 courses. I'll have like a verbal exam, a 3-hour verbal exam, and a 3-hour written exam,
Wow.
which is not designed by my professor, is designed by an external professor. And based on that, like I would have to take those exams within the span of three days, probably like take 8 exams in 2 to 3 days, and have my final assessment as an honors student. So, and when you are preparing for this exam, like you work with your professors to prepare for this exam. It's not your professor who's taking your exam. You are working with them to succeed in an exam, and like things like these, like where you truly get to go deep in a topic where you spend my coming honor seminar is going to be 4 hours long in behavioral economics. When you spend so much of a time with like 10 people with an expert in the field every single week, and then prepare for that exam throughout 2 years to just give it at the very end of your senior week. I think that really enables you to go deep into a course and become an intellectual within that field. So if you are somebody who is passionate about learning, like it's the place for you. But if you are not, you would have a tough time adapting to this very learning intensive environment.
Mm. Yeah, the previous Swarthmore student I had on the podcast, How You Wong, had a really beautiful description of the Swarthmore community, which I'm probably gonna butcher now. But the overall gist was just that it's a community of intellectuals and thought leaders, like future thought leaders, who love
Yeah.
learning for the sake of learning, and really want to make a positive impact on the world, like sort of through the power of education and knowledge. Do you think you agree with like every aspect of that statement? Anything you'd change?
Yeah, definitely. I think that could be the mission statement of Swarthmore. I think Swarthmore should work with Hayu to make a new mission statement. I think that sounds absolutely right.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think we've really laid it out there for a listener. I think we've really laid down sort of the from your understanding as well as from my understanding of what how you has said, just sort of the atmosphere and environment they can expect at Swarthmore, which will be a great fit for certain people and won't be for others. And this is the case with most universities out there.
Yeah.
But I'm just glad that we gave as much information as possible, so that people can be making ideally a more informed choice than you when you just sort of hurriedly filled out the last day after.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Don't be like me. I think that's the biggest advice from the podcast.
in many ways, be like you, yes, but yes, that one way, don't follow Ashish.
Yeah, that particularly one way. Don't be like me.
Um, I would love to begin wrapping up this episode. We've already touched upon your plan. It's a long journey of education you've got ahead. So after the undergrad, we touched upon your interest in these different niche fields of economics and pursuing the PhD. Just so someone has a very macro sense of where you're heading professionally, what do you see yourself doing with the PhD? And this can be a more broad answer. I'm not expecting something super concrete.
For me, I'm really passionate about thinking about problems of my own context. So I really want to employ the knowledge I will muster in like Swarthmore and the institution that I'll attend after Swarthmore to think about context of Nepal. That's what I really want to do. I think I want to work in the international development sector and maybe eventually come back to Nepal to think more critically about its economy and politics. Yeah, I'm really interested in politics as well. I could end up becoming a politician, but that would be like after 25 years or 30 years. That's the joke I tell because I passionately follow politics of Nepal. uh, I could see that happening, but I just, in terms of just like, in terms of profession, I think my profession, as a professional, I see myself in international economics, international development sector, thinking about the global development challenges and how we can solve the world poverty or solve the global inequality. I think that's what I want to spend my professional life in.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a beautiful conversation. We've touched upon so many different aspects. We spent a lot of time diving deep into your university selection process, application process. We've touched a lot on the Swarthmore environment, the Swarthmore culture, the ideal Swarthmore student, as well as now we have an understanding of sort of where you're heading in terms of your professional path. And also Swarthmore being a great fit for someone who's going towards a PhD and someone really into the power of education and learning for the sake of learning. To wrap up this conversation, every podcast I do, my favorite personal section is the fast fire round of questions. So we'll not be able to let you go without that. Just a few quick questions I've prepared for you, and feel free to also keep your answers very brief. They could be just one short phrase or one sentence, and we'll
Okay.
sort of pick up the pace here.
Yeah,
Um,
this is exciting. Okay, I'm ready for it.
all right, let's go. The most fascinating class you've taken so far at Swarthmore?
I'd say the history and politics of prison. I'll just add a description here. It was a course where I traveled, I think, with 10 other students. We traveled every week, once a week, to a local jail. So these are people who were convicted, but do not serve federal prison. It's a jail, so they are serving like 6 months, a year, 2 years. So we took a class together with them. So our professor taught not only us, to 10 students at Swarthmore, but 10 other women who were serving their time in the jail. So we took a class together where we thought about the history and politics of the prison system in US. It was one of my life changing courses.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I really wish you had brought this up before the fast fire. I would have picked your brain further. But sort of, and this always happens in the fast fire, and I force myself to move on. So I'll move on to the next question. But after the podcast, I'll definitely pick your brain about this one class. What's one thing you'd change about Swarthmore if tomorrow you had the power to sort of, if you were the president of Swarthmore tomorrow, what's one thing you'd change?
I think every Swarthmore student would say the same. We would want the administration to be more responsive to students and hear what students want to change in Swarthmore. And there are a lot of demands out there already. So we would want a more responsive administration at Swarthmore.
Lovely. One, and maybe this is a harder question, but hard questions like this, I find to have like answers which are most valuable to listeners. So I want to touch sort of maybe a softer corner and ask about one big regret or one big mistake you made during these first 2 years at Swarthmore.
Okay, this I think, yeah, I think just being too committed with my initial chain of thoughts. I thought we touched a lot upon it. Just heading into Swarthmore with, it's not a closed mind, but it's also not an open mind with this initial approach of, "I'm going to do tech and then go and do this." I think I would, if I could go back, I would change myself to be more open-minded and to embrace the, joy that I was getting through taking courses I loved, rather than getting stuck in a mindset of, I want to take this particular route.
Yeah, I love that. That's we've touched upon that on the episode as well. And I'm glad we put this out there. So hopefully listeners who might be in a similar position as you can sort of take a different path. Um, what's any wise quote or saying that has stuck with you over the years, which comes to mind right now as something you'd like to share with listeners?
This is a very interesting quote. I'll say this in Nepali first. It's called "Yo समय नहीं बित्ने छ." I don't know who said this. I think I heard it somewhere. Uh, it translates to, "This time will also pass." And the beauty in this quote is you can say this in any phase of your life where you are enjoying, you could just say this time will also pass and hold on to the moment. And when you are suffering, you can say this time will also pass and look with optimism to the days ahead. So I really admire this quote. It gives me a lot of strength in both good times and bad times.
That's a great quote. I need to add that to my long list. Like almost every fast fire, I've gotten a great quote. I need to actually compile this,
I'm sure you have.
publish a book later on after about 100 episodes. Um, if you could spend a semester, and let's not, aside from Nepal for this question, but spend a semester in any city in the world as part of your Swarthmore education, what would be that city? And one reason why you chose that particular city?
I skipped my study abroad. I think I might regret it when I turn old, but if I had the opportunity to study abroad, I'd probably go to Addis Ababa. I hope I'm not butchering the name. It's the capital of Ethiopia because I found it very interesting as a country, and I've had friends from Ethiopia, and I think it's very culturally like similar to Nepal in so many different ways. I've done a lot of writing and reading of Ethiopia during my time at Swarthmore during my classes, so I really want to see that place and learn from the community. And I've met so many Ethiopians, and they're wonderful people. So I think that would be a place I really want to go if I get to study abroad. It would be in Ethiopia.
Finally, the last question of this fast fire round, and then we'll begin the final wrapping up. What's the biggest non-obvious difference between high school and university?
Being able to live 24/7 with your friends, because I didn't go to a boarding high school. I had to come back after classes, and it was 8 hours of classes every day. Like life is very different when you have this full independence and when you can manage your own life. You are totally in charge, and also you're able to live with your friends 24/7. That's really fun. I think I've really enjoyed that particular element of college.
Yeah, another student on the podcast put it beautifully, saying, I'm in college, I'm socializing literally till the minute I go to bed. Um, some people love that. Some people really need the me time.
It's exhausting as well at
Uh,
times.
There's two sides to the coins, but I wouldn't trade the experience for anything, honestly. The ability to
Yeah, me too.
meet friends at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. In the night, late night philosophical chats. These are memories which we're creating, which I'm sure will stick for like many years after we graduate. Um, Lastly, if you had to wrap up this episode with one final message to leave viewers, listeners, I'm assuming are like about 15, 16, 17 years old, high schoolers about to jump into university and then enter the real world, experience life at large. Any one final piece of wisdom or insight you'd like to end this podcast with?
I think it's really important to tell applicants to take care of themselves. I think we all have ambitions, and this particular moment or this fact of getting into school feels really important. And we get drawn away by these big names, the ranking of the schools like top 10 LSC, the IVs, and whatnot, right? But then I think it's important to tell that like life is still going to be the same. Like these institutions or this process is only going to have a marginal effect on who you are going to be. It's not going to determine the person you are going to be. And I think like it's important to highlight that. Uh, that's something that I was never told. Especially in South Asia, we are told that you need to dream big, you need to work hard. We watch movies and series where the protagonist is from a poor background and then is working like 16 hours a day to study. I think that's a very unhealthy approach to achieving our goals. I would encourage our less like young applicants to have a balanced approach to our ambition. Like I am an ambitious person and I really encourage ambition. I'm also trying to work on achieving those goals in a very healthy way. And I would encourage people to find healthier ways where they are truly understanding themselves and knowing their boundaries and limits while they are pursuing that path. I think I would encourage that.
Hmm. And I love the point about going beyond the institution. This is something I keep saying on the podcast. Like I've had conversations with students who go to universities that probably no one has heard of. And I've had
Yeah.
conversations with students from Harvard and USC and Oxford and the big names. And both sets of conversations have been valuable and insight filled. And so that's why on the podcast, I love to get all these type of institutions on and really tell listeners not to listen to an episode or judge an episode by the name of the university which the person goes to.
Yeah.
So easy to do. And look beyond the institution, look at the person himself or herself. Like you are so much more than the XYZ school you attend. That's just one
Yeah.
word on your resume. You're so much deeper as a person versus that just one degree and that piece of paper that you have. So go beyond the institution. Whether you go to a school that no one has heard of, or whether you end up going to an Ivy League, know that both ways you're gonna like getting into a great school doesn't mean you can sleep for the rest of your life. Like you're still going to have to work hard.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to end with based on what I said?
Yeah, I think that's been my experience as well, like meeting, when I go to conferences or when I meet people from different universities, like we have like the application process just emphasizes these name tags so much that it almost blinds you the value that each individual brings, right? Like you are not the company that you work at, or you're not the school that you go to. It has a marginal effect, but there is an intrinsic value in every individual, and I think it's very important to appreciate that. Like it's very important to have ambitious goals, right? Like these are top universities because of the funding they have, the kind of professors they have, and more. Like there is the great value in that, but try to understand the intrinsic value of yourself and other people. And I think I really admire that you are bringing all these different chains of thoughts together in your podcast, not just selling the top names.
Hmm.
And somehow I think a lot of time even content creators who are not very cautious of it kind of do this, like start this vicious circle of when you are just highlighting three universities in your podcast, then
Yeah.
it's very obvious that you are perpetuating the cycle that you have to get to these three universities to get the recognition, to get invited to podcasts, to have a platform where people can listen to you, right? I think I really admire that you are able to have that cautiousness of how we need to move beyond name tags. Everybody is equally capable. And I tell this to myself so many times that it could have been any other Nepali from with a very similar background that could have replaced me at Swarthmore. Like it's not just me, right? Like it's not, I do not get any superiority just because I came to a very selective school. Any other, like I had so many friends from Nepal who were equally capable, could have easily switched my place and could have done equally well at Swarthmore right now. So I think that's a very important lesson that we need to disseminate to young listeners.
Mm. That's a great way to end. I don't want to sort of ruin I mean, I think you ended it off with a bang. The very last thing I will say is I think be grateful that you even have a university education.
Yeah.
Students across the world, so many people I know on a personal level are unable to afford the luxury of a university education. Be grateful to be having this experience of your life, regardless of the institution that you go to and regardless of the 101 problems you might have with it. Be grateful that you're still able to study and pursue this higher education and learn for the sake of learning. But brilliant. I think we'll wrap it up at that. It's been a great conversation. If someone listening to this episode is eager to connect or has follow-up questions, what do you think is a good way to reach you?
Sure. I am always happy to support applicants. I get DMs in my Messenger. I get DMs in my Instagram. I get DMs in my LinkedIn as well. I think a very straightforward way, especially for applicants, would be to use Instagram. No, sorry, use LinkedIn because not everybody might be available in the other social platforms. Like if you can find me in any social network, like I mostly use Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Like I would be happy to answer it in any platform. I also get a lot of questions through email, so I could do that as well. But I guess I could send you out my social media handles, and you could put that in your description if somebody wants to reach out. But I would say standard platform would be LinkedIn.
For sure. I'll definitely put links in the description to all of these. And I hope people enjoy watching this episode and then are eager to pick your brain on certain things you
Yeah,
said and dive deeper. And we're all happy to help. Like we're just passing down the favor which our seniors give us as juniors.
yeah,
Our seniors about getting into Swarthmore, and now we're happy for you to annoy us a little bit about you getting into Swarthmore. Is what I'll say.
yeah.
Overall, thank you for a great conversation and thank you for your wise words on Uni Unveiled. my pleasure to host you on the podcast, Ashish.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you are doing, and thank you for giving me this platform to speak to a wide range of international students. Like I have had chances to talk with Nepali students before, but this is my first time giving like a global advice. So I hope this has been insightful. I understand that a lot of it is driven by my context of being a Nepali student. A Nepali student, I hope this can be transferable to other contexts as well. I'm so grateful that you are doing this work of disseminating knowledge and, as you said, handing down this knowledge because sometimes we see, some people are even trying to monetize knowledge, which is not a big problem, but I think it's really great to have these kind of free resources that equals the playing field where, even if you don't know anybody who went to a particular college, you can just watch podcast, and I'm sure you'll have a great compilation of episodes for all the young listeners. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the time you have given and the platform you have provided.
Brilliant. All right, that was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on Uni Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Uni Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to Uni Unveiled.